The clock struck 8 p.m., but the city never seemed to rest. The streets hummed with life, oblivious to the quiet storm brewing in the heart of Hawke Enterprises. Inside a towering glass building, one man's life was about to unravel, and it would take more than just a detective to piece it all together. Richard Hawke, CEO of Hawke Enterprises, had always prided himself on his ability to control every aspect of his life. But now, his final moments would be lost in a haze of betrayal, greed, and carefully hidden lies. The killer was closer than anyone could imagine, and as the night deepened, so too would the mystery of his death. And so, as always, it would fall to one man to solve it all. Nero Wolfe, the detective with a mind sharp enough to slice through deception like a hot knife through butter. Chapter 1. The call for help. The day was already drawing to a close when the phone rang. Nero Wolfe, the towering, portly detective known for his brilliant mind and a lifestyle of extreme indulgence, was lounging in his chair, a book in his hand. A slight frown creased his forehead as he glanced at the clock. Archie, his sharp-witted but often exasperated assistant, was nowhere to be seen, and the evening was shaping up to be as quiet as any other. The phone broke the silence, its shrill ring piercing the room. Wolfe grunted, placing the book down and pushing himself from the chair with a sigh that suggested he was giving up on the evening's peace. "Archie," he called, "answer that infernal thing." But before Archie could reach the phone, Wolfe reached out with a hand, lifting the receiver. "Yes?" His voice was gruff, clearly irritated, but his curiosity piqued at the sudden intrusion. A woman's voice crackled on the other end, strained and breathless. "Mr. Wolfe, Nero Wolfe?" "Yes. Who is this?" "This is Veronica Hawke. I need your help immediately." The panic in her voice was unmistakable. Wolfe's ears perked at the urgency, though his face betrayed no sign of emotion. This was no ordinary call. He adjusted his position in the chair, already mentally bracing for what was to come. "Go on, Miss Hawke. What is it you need?" "It's my father. He's dead." "And I—" "Dead?" Wolfe interrupted, his mind already sifting through the possibilities. "Murdered, I presume?" "Yes," she replied quickly. Where are you?" Wolfe's voice was sharp now, no time for pleasantries. "At Hawke Enterprises. My father was the CEO. He was found this morning, his office, the police. They're here, but they're not getting anywhere. I need someone who can actually solve this." Her voice cracked as if she were holding back tears. "Please, Mr. Wolfe, you're my last hope." Wolfe leaned back, glancing around the room as if mulling over the situation. "Murder, you say?" "A CEO found in his office. How very typical." "What makes you think I am the man for this job?" The woman, clearly desperate, didn't hesitate. "Because you're the only one who can see the truth. Please, mister." "Wolfe, my father's death wasn't an accident. It wasn't just some corporate rivalry. There's more to it." "I know it." Wolfe was silent for a moment, his mind already whirring. Archie appeared at the door, sensing something in the air. Wolfe didn't acknowledge him, though he could feel the assistant's expectant gaze. "I'll be there shortly," Wolfe said finally, his voice steady, almost amused at the simplicity of the case. "Archie, gather your things." "You're going to take it?" Archie asked, surprised. "I've seen enough." "I'll take it. You'll need to drive." The line went dead, and Wolfe hung up, his expression already shifting into that cold, calculating mode that Archie had come to recognize all too well. Wolfe didn't need to say another word before Archie moved into action, grabbing his coat, ready to follow the detective's every order. At Hawke Enterprises, By the time they arrived at Hawke Enterprises, the sun had already begun to dip below the skyline, casting a golden glow over the sleek glass and steel building. Wolfe, as usual, avoided stepping into the bustle of the corporate world, walking with slow, deliberate steps as he entered the building's lobby. His sheer presence commanded attention. They were led by a nervous secretary through polished halls, the scent of expensive cologne and fresh wood filling the air. At last, they reached the CEO's office, where a small crowd had gathered. Police officers hovered around the room, speaking in hushed tones, not yet able to make sense of the crime scene before them. Wolfe stepped inside, his eyes immediately sweeping the room. It was a large plush office, filled with dark wood furniture and high-end artwork. The body of the CEO, Richard Hawke, lay sprawled across his desk, an elegant but lifeless figure in an expensive suit. A half-empty glass of scotch sat by his hand. Wolfe's sharp gaze lingered on the glass, the small smudge of lipstick on its rim barely visible. "Who found the body?" Wolfe asked, not turning to look at anyone in particular. A uniformed officer, obviously still rattled by the scene, raised his hand hesitantly. "It was Miss Hawke, sir. She came in to deliver a report and found him like this." Wolfe nodded, his gaze still sweeping the room. "Leave us," he instructed the officers. "I'll take it from here." Reluctantly, the officers stepped out, though their curiosity was clearly piqued. The door clicked shut behind them, and Wolfe moved toward the desk. He didn't need to touch anything yet. The mere visual details were already screaming at him. Veronica Hawke stood near the window, her face pale and tense. "Mr. Wolfe," she began softly, "did you—" "Let me observe." Wolfe cut her off, his voice cool but commanding. He moved toward the desk, his eyes narrowing as he looked at the papers scattered on the surface. A small but telling detail caught his eye, an envelope tucked beneath a ledger. Without a word, Wolfe picked it up, carefully flipping it open. A single piece of paper, neatly folded. He didn't need to read it. The ink was still fresh, as if it had been written just moments before the murder. But there was something else, something about the way it had been placed that hinted at urgency, like the killer had wanted to make sure it was seen. "Miss Hawke," Wolfe said, his voice cutting through the silence. "Your father's death was no accident. I believe this is a murder, and I intend to find out who did it." His eyes glinted with determination. "And I will find out the truth. But you will have to answer every question I ask without hesitation." Veronica nodded silently, her eyes welling with tears. She hadn't realized just how much confidence Wolfe's words could instill. If anyone could uncover the truth, it would be Nero Wolfe. And so, the investigation began. Chapter 2. The investigation begins. The moment the door clicked shut behind the last of the officers, a thick silence settled over the room, broken only by the distant hum of the building's air conditioning. Nero Wolfe stood motionless for a few moments, his eyes fixed on the lifeless body of Richard Hawke. A glance over at the desk showed scattered papers, a tipped-over glass of scotch, and a dim, almost sinister light filtering in through the large windows. But it was the details that Wolfe sought, details that only the sharpest eye could pick up. "Archie," Wolfe said, without turning around, "inspect the rest of the office. Look for anything out of place, anything that stands out." Archie, already used to Wolfe's focused attention and decisive actions, nodded and moved around the room. Wolfe, however, remained rooted to the spot, his gaze fixed intently on the scene before him. It was as if he could hear the faint whispers of the room, telling him a story that no one else could hear. The desk Wolfe's first step was the desk. He didn't need to get too close. From his vantage point, he could already tell that the CEO's office was a place of high-stakes decisions. It was immaculate, with everything in its place, except for the papers. The chaotic scattering of documents, some half-written and others crumpled at the edges, indicated that the CEO had been working at the time of his death. A faint scuff mark on the corner of the desk seemed to confirm his suspicion. Richard Hawke had likely been in the middle of a heated conversation, perhaps a phone call or argument, when something had gone terribly wrong. Wolfe's mind ticked through the possibilities, all while he remained a statue in the center of the room. Then his eyes landed on the envelope again, the one he had noticed earlier. He unfolded it with care as though it were a treasure to be examined with utmost precision. The writing was neat, the ink fresh, and Wolfe's keen eyes caught the subtle signature at the bottom, a name he recognized instantly. Edward Hayes, a rival corporate mogul who had long held an antagonistic relationship with Hawke. Wolfe's lips barely moved as he muttered to himself, Hayes. Of course, the glass of scotch Wolfe turned his attention to the glass of scotch sitting near the edge of the desk. It was the one detail that bothered him the most. Something about the positioning of it didn't sit right. Most people, when they are left alone in an office, would set down their drink and settle into their chair with the intention to relax. But Hawke had not relaxed. He had been disturbed enough to knock over his drink. Wolfe's gaze lingered on the rim of the glass where faint traces of lipstick remained. His eyes narrowed. This detail alone told him something important. Whoever had been in the room with Hawke had been close enough to kiss him, close enough to be seen in such an intimate manner. It wasn't a random intruder, it was someone familiar, someone who had easy access to him. The clues left behind show. Archie, meanwhile, was busy inspecting the rest of the room. He was methodical, flipping through the papers, checking the drawers of the desk, looking under the furniture, anything that could potentially hide the truth. As he moved around, he noticed the faintest scuff marks on the polished wooden floor, leading from the desk to the door. "These weren't here before," Archie said, his voice low but certain. He crouched down, running his fingers over the smooth surface. "Looks like someone was dragged, or perhaps someone had been moving quickly." Wolfe's sharp mind immediately connected the dots. The scuff marks led toward the door where the body had been found. Whoever had killed Richard Hawke had clearly been in a hurry, but the scuff marks were inconsistent. There was no sign of a struggle, no blood. "Is there any sign of forced entry?" Wolfe asked without taking his eyes off the scene. "No," Archie replied after a quick inspection. "The door was locked from the inside, and there's no sign of anyone breaking in." Wolfe's gaze hardened. So, the killer was someone Hawke trusted enough to let into the office? Someone with the key to this room. The body Wolfe turned its attention back to Richard Hawke's body. It was lying in an unnatural position, sprawled across the desk. It seemed like a careless way to fall. His head awkwardly tilted to one side, one arm sprawled over a pile of paper. But Wolfe could tell that the placement of the body was intentional. It was almost as if the killer had staged it. No blood splatter around the desk or walls. The victim wasn't shot or stabbed. There was no visible sign of injury. Wolfe walked over to the body, stopping just short of touching it. He examined the neck, the wrist, the slight discoloration of the skin. "Poison," he murmured. "Poison?" Archie echoed as if the very idea of it had shocked him. "But there's no glass, no cup, no trace." "It was in the drink," Wolfe said, his voice steady as he observed the glass again. The glass that had been knocked over. He paused. The lipstick on the rim, that tells me who it was. The interrogation of Veronica Hawke Wolfe motioned for Veronica to come forward, finally giving her the floor. She had been standing by the window, her body stiff and her gaze distant, clearly lost in her own thoughts. "Miss Hawke," Wolfe began, his tone sharp but not unkind, "you found your father's body. I assume you knew him well?" Veronica nodded, but there was a hesitation in her eyes, a reluctance that Wolfe didn't miss. "Of course. I don't know what happened. He was fine yesterday." Everything seemed fine. "Fine?" Wolfe echoed. "How fine was your relationship with him, Miss Hawke? Were there any complications? Any enemies?" Her face flickered with the briefest sign of emotion, fear, guilt. "I don't know what you're asking me. I'm asking whether there was anyone in your father's life who might want to see him dead," Wolfe said, his voice cutting through her hesitation. She lowered her gaze. "My father had many enemies. The business world is full of them, but none of them would ever, wouldn't they?" Wolfe's gaze was unrelenting. "What about Edward Hayes?" Veronica flinched. "You know about him?" "I know more than you think. Tell me, Miss Hawke, what was your father's relationship with Hayes? Was it as friendly as it appeared, or was there something more sinister beneath the surface?" Her eyes widened. "What are you implying?" "My father hated him. Hayes was a competitor. He wanted my father's company." Wolfe nodded slowly, then turned to the door. "Well, Miss Hawke, we've just begun. But I intend to find out everything, and in time, we will have the answers you seek." Chapter 3. Uncovering Secrets. The investigation had only just begun, but already Wolfe could feel the tension building in the air. The room, with its polished wood floors and sleek furniture, had become a stage for a drama of corporate intrigue, secrets, and lies. But what bothered Wolfe most was the feeling that the truth was slipping through his fingers, just out of reach. He was sure of one thing. Whoever had killed Richard Hawke had been both calculated and cold. This was no random act of violence. No, this had been a carefully planned murder. The shadow of Edward Hayes. The following day, Wolfe decided to dig deeper into Richard Hawke's business dealings. Archie had gathered some background information, but Wolfe needed to understand the full extent of the relationships at play. The name that kept resurfacing, Edward Hayes, was no coincidence. If there was anyone who stood to gain from Hawke's death, it was Hayes. The corporate rival had been fighting for control of the market for years, and Richard Hawke had always been a formidable opponent. Wolfe instructed Archie to make inquiries. "Find out everything you can about Hayes, his meetings, his associates, and his movements. I don't want to leave any stone unturned. We need to know if he was involved with Hawke on a personal level, or if this is just business." As Archie made the calls and met with various sources, Wolfe sat quietly, his mind running through scenarios, analyzing the few facts they had. The evidence, scant as it was, pointed to one person, but Wolfe never trusted the obvious answer. He needed more than just circumstantial evidence. The meeting with Hayes' associate. A few hours later, Archie returned, looking more worn than usual. "I found something interesting," he said, handing over a file. Edward Hayes met with Richard Hawke several times in the last few months. The meetings were frequent, almost too frequent for two people who supposedly hated each other. Wolfe raised an eyebrow as he flipped through the file. So they had a truce? Of sorts?" "Not exactly. They were meeting to discuss a business merger. Both men had been negotiating a way to combine their companies and dominate the market. And yet, Wolfe murmured, Hayes still had something to gain from Hawke's death. Why would he negotiate a merger and then kill him? Archie finished. Exactly. Wolfe leaned back, stroking his chin thoughtfully. There's more to this than just business. There's a personal angle we're missing, a closer look at Veronica Hawke. With this new information, Wolfe knew he needed to take another look at Richard Hawke's daughter, Veronica. Something about her didn't sit right. She had seemed distraught, of course, but there was a calmness in her eyes that hinted at something deeper, something hidden. Wolfe had already suspected that she might know more than she was letting on, and it was time to find out just how deep her involvement went. Wolfe and Archie arrived at Hawke Enterprises once again. This time they made their way to Veronica's office, a sleek, modern space that reflected the wealth and power her father had built. Veronica was seated behind her desk, her posture stiff as she looked up from the papers before her. Miss Hawke, Wolfe said with his usual calm demeanor. I trust you've had some time to process everything? Veronica nodded slowly but said nothing, her fingers drumming on the desk nervously. I've been doing some digging, Miss Hawke, Wolfe continued, his voice never wavering. And I've discovered that your father and Mr. Hayes were in the midst of a very delicate business negotiation, a merger, as it were. Her expression didn't change, but Wolfe could see her stiffen at the mention of Hayes. Did you know about the merger? Wolfe asked, his voice casual but sharp, like a knife hidden in velvet. Veronica hesitated before speaking. Yes, I was aware, but that doesn't mean I had anything to do with my father's death. Wolfe watched her closely. Her reaction was telling, but it wasn't enough. Tell me about your relationship with Mr. Hayes. Were you involved with them at all? At this, Veronica's face turned pale. She stood up quickly, her chair scraping against the floor. What are you implying, Mr. Wolfe? I'm implying nothing, Wolfe said, his gaze never leaving her. But I am asking you, Miss Hawke. Did you have any personal dealings with Mr. Hayes? Veronica faltered for a moment before answering. No, I did not. My father and Mr. Hayes kept their dealings strictly professional. That's all. Wolfe didn't buy it. There was something in her tone, something in the way she avoided eye contact that made him suspicious. But he needed more. He needed proof. Then perhaps you can explain the lipstick on your father's glass, Wolfe said, his voice low and measured. Veronica's face flushed instantly, and for a moment, Wolfe thought she might collapse under the weight of her own guilt. I don't know what you're talking about, she stammered. Wolfe's lips curled into a slight smile, one that didn't reach his eyes. The lipstick, Miss Hawke. On the rim of the glass by your father's desk. It was yours, wasn't it? Veronica's eyes flickered, her composure slipping for just a moment. She took a deep breath and Wolfe saw her make a decision. Fine, she said, her voice cold now. It was mine. But that doesn't mean anything. What does it mean then? Wolfe interrupted. That you were in the office, Miss Hawke, that you were close to your father when he was killed, and perhaps you knew more about what was happening with Hayes than you've let on. Her silence was deafening. The phone call Wolfe's instincts were screaming now. Veronica Hawke knew more than she was letting on, but there was something else, something deeper. He couldn't put his finger on it yet, but it was there, lurking in the shadows. As he turned to leave her office, his phone buzzed with an incoming call. He glanced at the screen and saw the name, Edward Hayes. Speak of the devil, Wolfe muttered to himself. Mr. Wolfe? Hayes's voice was smooth and calculated. I understand you're looking into the death of Richard Hawke. I believe we need to talk. Wolfe leaned back in his chair, his fingers tapping the phone lightly. And what, pray tell, do you have to say for yourself, mister? Hayes? I have nothing to hide, Wolfe, Hayes said, his voice dripping with arrogance. But I think you'll find that there's more to this situation than you think. Wolfe's eyes gleamed. I have no doubt about that. Let's see if your version of the truth matches the facts. He hung up, his mind already racing through the new information. There was something very wrong here, and Wolfe was determined to find out what it was, before anyone else could. Chapter 4. The Final Reveal. The early morning light filtered through the blinds of Wolfe's brownstone, casting long shadows across the room. Wolfe, seated in his usual chair, was deep in thought. Archie moved about, adjusting the curtains, collecting his notes from the case. But Wolfe barely seemed to notice. He had been like this all morning, absorbed in the pieces of the puzzle, the clues scattered before him, like fragments of a much larger story. Wolfe was nothing if not methodical, and now he was ready to draw his conclusions. The calm before the storm. It had been 2 days since Wolfe had first walked into Richard Hawke's office, and in that time, he had pieced together a story that no one else had been able to see. The lipstick on the glass, the secret business dealings with Hayes, the strange manner in which Hawke had been positioned. Wolfe had let the clues simmer in his mind, not rushing to conclusions. But now, the facts were clear and it was time to confront the people involved. Wolfe's sharp gaze moved Archie, who was sitting across from him, flipping through his own notes. Get Hayes, Wolfe instructed, his voice low, almost gleaming with quiet anticipation. Call him. I want him here now. Archie raised an eyebrow. You sure about this? We don't have concrete evidence yet. All we have are pieces. Wolfe's lips curled into a small, knowing smile. Archie, my boy, all I need are the pieces. The full picture will come when I place them together. And Hayes? He's the missing piece. The arrival of Edward Hayes. Half an hour later, the doorbell rang. Archie opened the door to reveal Edward Hayes, the man at the center of all the intrigue, dressed in an impeccably tailored suit. He stood tall, exuding the kind of confidence that only a man of power could possess. But his eyes, those dark, calculating eyes, betrayed a hint of nervousness, as if he knew that something was coming. Mr. Wolfe, Hayes said, his voice smooth and controlled, though there was an edge to it. I presume you've had time to think over our conversation. I can assure you, there is no mystery here. Wolfe's gaze was icy, and he didn't stand to greet Hayes. Come in, Mr. Hayes, please take a seat. We have much to discuss. As Hayes sat down, Wolfe wasted no time. Let me make this simple for you, Hayes. Richard Hawke didn't just die. He was murdered, and the man who murdered him is sitting right in front of me. Hayes's expression faltered for a moment, just the slightest twitch of his lips. He composed himself quickly, though, and smiled. Mr. Wolfe, you do have an active imagination. A man dies in his office, and you spin all kinds of tales. But I assure you, I had nothing to do with it. Wolfe leaned forward, his eyes never leaving Hayes. You're lying, Mr. Hayes. The moment I walked into Hawke's office, I knew you were involved. The question wasn't whether you were guilty. The question was how you did it. The confession. Wolfe's voice was calm, but it carried an undeniable authority. Hayes shifted uncomfortably in his chair. Wolfe's eyes scanned his face for any sign of the truth, and in that instant, Wolfe saw it. A flicker of guilt, quickly masked by the smooth facade Hayes had built over the years. You and Richard Hawke were business rivals, yes. But you were also more than that. Wolfe continued, his voice sharp. I discovered your correspondence with him. Letters, signed agreements, and even that last strange meeting about the merger. A merger that you promised would benefit both parties. But that was a lie, wasn't it, Hayes? Hayes' lips tightened, but he said nothing. You knew Hawke wouldn't go through with it. You knew he'd find out your true intentions. Wolfe pressed on. Hawke wasn't just a businessman. He was someone with integrity, someone who couldn't be bought. But you were willing to do anything to get your hands on his company. So, you did what you had to do. Hayes' gaze shifted, and Wolfe knew the moment had come. You poisoned him, Wolfe said. You slipped the poison into his glass of scotch just as I suspected. The lipstick on the rim, that was your signature, Miss Hawkes? Suddenly Hayes laughed, a deep guttural sound. You think I did it? Do you really think I'm stupid enough to leave all that evidence around? No, Wolfe, you're barking up the wrong tree. Wolfe didn't flinch. I never said you were stupid. I said you were desperate, but the true culprit wasn't you, was it? The room went still, and Hayes' expression flickered again. Wolfe leaned in, his eyes burning with intensity. You had an accomplice, Wolfe continued. A person who wanted to inherit Hawke's empire as much as you did. Someone who had more to gain from his death than you ever did. For a long moment, Hayes said nothing. But Wolfe could see the walls breaking down in his mind. Finally, Hayes spoke. Yes, I had an accomplice. But you're not gonna like who it is, Hayes said, his voice suddenly dropping to a whisper. The final twist. Wolfe stood up, walking slowly toward the window. I already know it was Veronica Hawke, wasn't it? There was a long silence. She had everything to gain. She was her father's only heir, after all. She wanted the company, the power, the influence. And you, Hayes, promised her everything. All she had to do was help you get rid of her father. Wolfe turned to face Hayes, his expression cold and unwavering. You poisoned Richard Hawke together. You gave him the drink, and Miss Hawke made sure the lipstick was left on the glass. A perfect alibi for both of you. Hayes' face twisted with frustration. You've got it all wrong. Veronica? Save your breath, Wolfe interrupted, his voice like steel. I knew she had something to do with it the moment I saw her reaction to the lipstick on the glass. She wanted to hide the truth, but in doing so, she only exposed it. She had a motive, Hayes, and I believe you both worked together to eliminate the one person standing in your way. Hayes leaned back in his chair, defeated. He had no more words to offer. The truth had been laid bare. The confrontation, Archie stepped forward, his hand outstretched, holding the final piece of evidence. A confession letter written by Veronica Hawke. It was a letter she had written to Hayes, admitting her role in the murder and her willingness to work with him to secure her father's empire. Hayes looked at the letter and then at Wolfe. His shoulders slumped as he realized the game was up. Veronica will be arrested, of course, Wolfe said, his voice soft now, almost melancholic. But as for you, Mr. Hayes, you'll be facing your own consequences. Your actions have caught up with you. Hayes, his face pale and drawn, nodded. I guess I'll have to face them. Epilogue. The case was closed, but Wolfe knew the truth would linger. Veronica Hawke's ambition had led to her father's death, and Hayes' greed had pushed him into an alliance with her that ended in murder. But the world would never see the whole story, only the parts Wolfe had revealed. As Wolfe sat back in his chair, Archie placed a glass of scotch in front of him. a wry smile on his face. "Well, that's that, I suppose. Another case solved by the great Nero Wolfe." Wolfe raised his glass, a small smile tugging at the corners of his lips. "Indeed, Archie. But remember, the true victory is in solving the puzzle, not in the prize." And with that, Wolfe settled back into his chair, content for the moment as the mysteries of the world continued to unfold. The end.